feel like the ultimate goal of a reader is to be reading books we want to read, but naturally something happens where we buy books that we want to read and they end up sitting on our shelves for way too long and we never get to them. So that's what this video is here for. It is a way for me to prioritize some of the books that I want to read, but I typically forget that I own them or that they exist on my shelf, or things just get prioritized above them. So I'm introducing you to my TBR Vets video, which essentially is a list of books that have been on my shelves a far too embarrassing amount of time. And just like everything I'm doing for 2024, I'm curating it to the categories I read. I'm trying to help myself read from everything that I like to read, and I've really, I think, narrowed it down the 4 categories I typically like to read. You'll be sick of hearing about them by the end of my year-end content. For this video, I made sure I had at least 1 TBR vet. I aimed for 3 in each of the 4 categories that I want to read more of next year. So fantasy, fantasy romance, indie published fantasy, and horror. Some of these were harder than others. Let's start with the indie published fantasy because I do have 3 of those. I'm embarrassed to say that I haven't read Shadowless by Randall McNally yet. I'm really excited about this one. He was one of the first authors who had reached out to me to send me a copy of his book, and I'm still really excited to get to this one. It is a stunning book. It has a handwritten letter for me in it. The author is so nice, and this was an SPFBO one year. In this world, some people are born without shadows. They are children of the gods and they are hunted down. So if you're born shadowless, this does not mean good things for you. They're constantly hiding themselves and trying to just survive. They are half human and half god, but I'm expecting during this story for them to start to group together and fight back for a chance at survival, and I think that sounds really good, and I'm really excited to read this one. I just forget that I own it so often, which sucks because I need to prioritize this. I need to read it. The next one is Never Die. Now, I haven't owned this book as long as some of the others that you will see on this list, but it is one of the longest owned indie pub that I do have. I think it's about a year old on my shelf, which I find I read my indies quite fast, so I'm actually shocked about this. This is a series of standalone, so I have read the 2nd book in the series, and I really loved that one, so that has kicked up my motivation to read this, and I don't think it'll sit on my shelves for too much longer. But I tend to prioritize other Rob J. Hayes over this one, and I'm not entirely sure why, because the world building in this is really cool. I know this is filled with epic battles, and I typically like a fast-paced battle-heavy story like this, and I'm just excited to see where it goes. It's full of Japanese mythology and things like that, and I love anime, so I'm really excited for this one. I need to get to it. The last indie pub that I have is Cold from the North. Again, not one that I've owned longer than any other book on my shelf, but one of the longest indies I've owned. The problem for me in winter books tends to be that I have other reading plans in winter, so December and January are pretty scheduled heavy for me, and then I miss out on the time to read winter books, so I need to remind myself that I can read a winter book in the summer. It does not have to be read during the winter months. And then maybe I get to that a little bit faster, because I honestly, there's another winter themed fantasy in this at some point, because I literally just think I have to read them in the winter, and then I don't read them in the winter, and then it's like, oh, it's summer, it's too late, but it's not. I know there's a civil war happening within this, and we follow our main character who goes on a quest to get the princess's help and aid for his falling nation and comrades, and I'm just excited to see where this goes. The winter theme part of it has me so addicted. I love a polar fantasy. I love what winter adds to a story as a setting, so I'm really excited to get to this one. Honestly, we're moving on to fantasy romance because this was the hardest category to do, and I actually only kind of have 1. When I looked at my shelves, I just realized that all the fantasy romance I own is pretty much from my birthday this year, so I haven't owned them very long, and I've gotten through them quite quickly. Before then, I was buying the ebook and reading them on my Kindle as I wanted them, so I really didn't have a large sprawling TBR full of veterans that I haven't read. There is one though. Technically, I guess kind of 2, but Jennifer L. Armentrout, both her A Flesh and Fire novels and From Blood and Ash, I have been meaning to read for a long time. I only own the A Flesh and Fire one, but I do need to continue on in the From Blood and Ash series. I haven't continued. I think I'm on like the 4th book, maybe the 5th, I don't know. Essentially when this one started, I fell off the wagon, but I have since then read the first one in this, but I've owned this for so long, I need to get to them. I don't really want to tell you what the series is about because this, I don't know, I just feel like it's such a spoiler for the first book now, But from Blood and Ash, the first book in like the entire world, follows our main character Poppy, who is a maiden, which means she cannot be touched or seen. She's being saved for the gods, and she starts to question that when she gets a bodyguard who is kind of asking her, like, why? Why can't you be touched? Why can't you be seen? Why do you have to live your life this way? And it just goes from there. It is a fantasy romance, so you know what to expect. But yeah, this is pretty much my only TBR vet for fantasy romance at this moment in time. Let's move on to horror, and then we'll end off with fantasy because I do have the biggest group of TBR vets for that. The one that has been sitting on my shelf the longest is The Loop by Jeremy Robert Johnson. I still really want to read this. This is about a small town that there is a science experiment that goes wrong and people are just trying to survive the night. I'm expecting something like zombies or something, but I'm not entirely sure. And I've just been intrigued to read this. That's why I bought it, but I never gravitate towards it. So I need to put it on this list so that I might read it. Specifically for this list, there's always a space on my TBR board that says TBR vet, so if I land on that, I go and read something from this video. So The Loop is a very big contender for that. The next one is The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead. I would say this is actually probably more of a thriller, which is why I've been putting it off even though I'm really interested in it, because thrillers don't always work for me. I'm definitely more of a horror girl than a thriller, but I kind of just keep them together on my shelf, and I always just don't end up picking this one up. I know a lot of people who love this. I know it's like a very deep discussion on cults and things like that. I know it hits hard and there's trigger warnings. That's pretty much all I know about it because it's a thriller. So I think that's kind of why it sits on my shelf sometimes, because I don't know a lot about it, but I don't want to know a lot about it because I want to go into this with like open eyes and just experience it for what it is. But I definitely need to get to this one. Honestly, the same time I bought this one, I also bought Just Like Mother by Anne Heltzel. And I need to read this one. Another cult book. I really do like what cults add to a story, which is why I actually bought these, I think, thinking I would do a cult reading vlog, and then it just never happened. So maybe one time in the future it will happen. Again, I know nothing about this besides that it's a cult, and I just don't want to know more, but then it stops me from picking it up. So I'm hoping that putting it on this list, one time I'll roll that, and I'll be like, oh, maybe it's time to pick up this book. On to fantasy, we have a lot of big boys in this category. The first ones I will talk about are Legacy of Steel and Legacy of Light, books 2 and 3 in the Legacy trilogy. I've read the first book of this 2 years ago. I really liked it, but I've yet to continue, and part of that is the size of these. They're so big and chunky, and they are a bit of a slower story, so they do take a little bit more for me to get into. But I do want to continue the series. I do want to see how it ends, because I did really enjoy what was set up in that first one, but I've owned these for so long and have not continued. I really need to. Maybe, hopefully this year will be the time. This is one of the first books I bought when I was getting back into reading, and yet I still haven't read it, which is The Raven Tower by Anne Leckie. I do really want to try this author, and this one is kind of short, and this author writes a lot of sci-fi, I believe, and sci-fi is a little more daunting to me. So this one, it sounds really unique, which is also why I want to read it. But again, I don't know why I just keep putting the story off. I think it's because it sits a little bit lower on my bookshelf. Probably it sits in this bookshelf right here, which I don't look at very often, which is pretty much what I call the place where books go to die. And I need that not to happen because I want to get to pretty much every book on this bookshelf or else I wouldn't own it. But I forget they exist. This says, gods meddle in the fates of men and men play with the fates of gods. And that right there always sucks me in. Sometimes I just need to read the synopsis of a book again to remember why I wanted to read it and have like my excitement renewed for it. There's a pretender on the throne and we must cast him out, and that's pretty much all I know about this, but I think it sounds really exciting in my opinion. I need to get to it. The next one is A Winter of Ice and Iron, another polar fantasy on this list. I actually have gotten about 50 pages into this before, and it just wasn't the time for me to read this, so I put it down, wanting to pick it up again. It was a very, like, expansive world. It had a harder writing style for me to get into, but I know once I'm into it, I'll be into it. In the story, we're following our main character, who ends up offering herself to the Mad King in order to save him from conquering her land. I remember there being a really cool magic system in this about like spirit magic that got passed down by blood, but also if you kill someone you can take their magic, and so that's why we have this mad power hungry king who's just trying to like take all the magic he can, and I thought that was really cool. Something I love about winter books is I find the setting typically plays into the story quite a bit, and I love seeing where that goes. So the cold I think will add a lot to this story. I'm really excited for it. I just need to remember I can read this in the summer. Oh god, I'm ashamed to talk about the next one. I'm quite ashamed. The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. I don't know how long I've owned this, and the problem is I think that this will be a 5-star for me, but that makes me terrified to read it. Like, literally terrified. I've heard so many people talk about how incredible this series is, and I want to experience that, so why haven't I yet? Because I've owned this a really long time, like a really long time. I bought it the first year of my booktube channel. The archipelago was once divided into 7 lands, but it has since been conquered and brought into 1. Some people thought this would bring prosperity to the land, but instead has brought starvation and hunger, and the gods being mad at them, and hence there is a rebellion, and that's literally all I know about this. I've just heard such good things about this book that I need to read it. It needs to not be a TBR vet when I make this next year, because I'm pretty sure it was on last year's. And then we have The Obsidian Tower by Melissa Caruso. Another book that just, I forget exists. And then I read the synopsis and I go, oh, that's really cool, I should read it. Deep within Glomingard Castle lies a black tower sealed by ancient magic. It guards a dangerous secret that has been contained for thousands of years. As warden, Ryxander knows the warning passed down through generations. Nothing must unseal the door. But one decision will leave her with blood on her hands and unleash a threat that could doom the world to darkness. A door that must remain sealed, but is opened. How cool. And I really should probably throw The Words of Radiance onto this list, the second book in the Stormlight Archive. I read The Way of Kings a long time ago and I gave it 5 stars. I've yet to continue. As much as I like chunky books, an 1,000-page book is just very scary. Very scary, even though I know it'll be 5 stars. It's just like all of the things I could read in the meantime. All the things I could love in the meantime. But I need to continue my Stormlight journey because I do enjoy Brandon Sanderson, and I mean, this is just such an iconic fantasy series now, especially with the whole Cosmere thing, and I'm just scared of it. I'm truly just scared of it, so it's a TBR vet every single year, and I don't know when it'll stop being, but maybe this year will be the time. I could probably list a few more fantasy ones, but I don't need to call myself out that much. So this is the end of me calling myself out. I'm excited to see which ones of these gets read this year. Hopefully a lot of them, because I always want to have new books that I'm really excited into, and I find that if a book has been on my shelves for far too long, I stop being excited about it. So I do want to continue to read some of these because I just want to always be excited about the books that are on my shelves. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, you could let me know one of your TBR bets that you're hoping to get to in the new year. Or if you're not hoping to get to it, just let me know something that's been on your shelves the longest or that you're embarrassed to say. You could also just leave me an emoji to say you were here. Leave me a water emoji for The Grace of Kings. And then if you'd like to connect with me on other platforms, my Bookstagram, my Book Twitter, my Goodreads, and my Patreon are all linked in the description bar below. Have yourselves an absolutely remarkable day. Oh, so many books, so little time. So many books, so little time. Where's my coffee? Coffee.